Grace had always been the kind of woman who carried her burdens quietly. Even now, 8 months pregnant and moving like she had weights tied to her ankles, she never complained. Every morning she woke up before dawn in their small apartment in Lagos, prepared breakfast for her husband Mike, tidied their home, and somehow managed to keep everything running smoothly despite the constant ache in her lower back and the swelling in her feet. Mike worked as a sales representative for a telecommunications company, though lately he seemed to spend more time on his phone scrolling through social media than actually working. He would sit in their tiny living room, legs sprawled across their second-hand couch, eyes glued to his screen while Grace moved around him like a shadow, sweeping, washing dishes, folding laundry with her pregnant belly pressed against the edge of the table. Her mother had visited 3 weeks before the baby was due and pulled her aside in the kitchen. "My daughter," she had whispered, glancing toward the living room where Mike was laughing at something on his phone. "Marriage is not easy. You must have patience. A woman's patience is what keeps her home standing. Do you understand?" Grace had nodded, even though something inside her wanted to ask. "But Mama, what about his patience? What about his kindness?" But she kept those questions locked inside, just like she locked away her frustration every time Mike criticized her cooking or complained that his shirts weren't ironed perfectly. That Thursday evening, the sky over Lagos had turned a strange shade of gray, heavy with rain that threatened but hadn't yet fallen. Grace had spent the afternoon trying to fold clothes, but the pain in her abdomen kept interrupting her. Sharp. Stabbing. Different from the usual discomfort she'd grown used to. She tried to ignore it, tried to push through like she always did, but by early evening, she hadn't managed to prepare Mike's dinner. The pain had been too intense, forcing her to sit down every few minutes, catching her breath and praying it would pass. When Mike came home from meeting his friends at a nearby spot, he walked straight to the kitchen, looked around at the empty stove, and his face darkened. "Grace, where is my food?" She emerged from the bedroom, one hand pressed against the wall for support, the other cradling her belly. "Mike, I'm sorry. I was planning to cook, but the pain. I think something is happening with the baby." He glanced at her briefly, then looked away. "Pain. You've been pregnant for months now. Every day it's pain, pain, pain. What about my needs? Am I not working hard outside? Don't I deserve to come home to a proper meal?" Grace felt tears beginning to form. "Please, Mike. I'm not making excuses. I really tried but..." A sudden contraction gripped her so powerfully that she gasped and doubled over, grabbing onto the doorframe. When it passed, she looked up at her husband with fear in her eyes. "Mike, I think the baby is coming. We need to go to the hospital. Now." Mike was sitting on the couch now, remote control in hand, flipping through channels. He didn't even look at her. "Hospital? Right now? Just like that?" He laughed bitterly. "Grace, you think you can just neglect your duties all day and then snap your fingers and I'll come running? You didn't cook my food. You didn't even warm water for my bath when I came in. And now you want me to drop everything." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and she cried out, sinking to her knees on the floor. "Mike, please. The baby. Something is wrong. I need to get to the hospital. Please, I'm begging you." He stood up then, but not to help her. He stood up and pointed his finger at her, his voice rising. "You women think marriage is just about carrying pregnancy and everyone should bow down to you. What about respect? What about taking care of your husband? You want me to look like a fool, rushing around while you can't even perform basic duties?" "But Mike, I could die." "You won't die," he cut her off coldly. "You're just being dramatic. This is exactly why I need to teach you a lesson. You'll learn that in this house, I am the head. Not you. Not your pregnancy. Me." The neighbors in the adjoining apartment had heard the commotion. Mrs. Adebayo, an elderly woman who lived next door, came knocking frantically. "What is happening? Is that Grace screaming?" When she pushed the door open and saw Grace on the floor, tears streaming down her face, another contraction racking her body, Mrs. Adebayo's eyes went wide. Jesus Christ. Mike, your wife is in labor. What are you doing standing there? Stay out of this, Mama, Mike said dismissively. This is between husband and wife. Mrs. Adebayo ignored him and knelt beside Grace. My dear, can you stand? We need to get you to the hospital now. Grace nodded weakly, but when she tried to stand, her legs couldn't support her weight. Mrs. Adebayo called out to the other neighbors, and within minutes, 3 more people had rushed in. Mike, please. Mrs. Adebayo turned to him one more time. I'm begging you as your elder. Take your wife to the hospital. Whatever anger you have, put it aside. This is about life and death. Mike crossed his arms. No. She needs to learn. I'm not going anywhere until she understands her place in this marriage. The neighbors stared at him in shock. One of the men, Mr. Okafor, shook his head in disgust. You are not a man. You are a disgrace. With that, they lifted Grace carefully and helped her down the stairs to a waiting taxi. Mrs. Adebayo climbed in beside her, holding her hand. As the car pulled away, Grace looked back at the apartment building, hoping somehow Mike would change his mind and come running after them. But the window remained dark, and she knew he wasn't coming. If you're enjoying Grace's story and want to see what happens next, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about Mike's behavior. Should Grace forgive him? We'll see you in. The taxi ride to General Hospital Lagos felt endless. Every pothole, every speed bump sent shockwaves of pain through Grace's body. She gripped Mrs. Adebayo's hand so tightly that the older woman's fingers turned white, but Mrs. Adebayo never complained. She just kept whispering prayers and words of comfort. Breathe, my daughter. In and out. We're almost there. God will see you through this. But Grace wasn't thinking about breathing techniques or God's mercy. Her mind kept circling back to one devastating question. Where is my husband? She had imagined this moment so many times during her pregnancy. In her dreams, Mike would be beside her, nervous but supportive, holding her hand, telling her she was strong, that everything would be okay. She had imagined him pacing outside the delivery room, excited and anxious to meet their first child. She never imagined she would be heading to the hospital without him, that he would choose his pride over her life. When they arrived at the hospital, 2 nurses rushed out with a wheelchair. One of them, Nurse Blessing, took one look at Grace's condition and immediately started asking questions. How far apart are the contractions? About 3 minutes, Mrs. Adebayo answered. How long has she been in labor? At least 2 hours that we know of. And where is her husband? The question hung in the air. Grace turned her face away, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. Mrs. Adebayo's voice was tight with anger when she responded. Her husband refused to bring her. He said she didn't cook his dinner or prepare his bath, so he wouldn't take her to the hospital. Nurse Blessing stopped pushing the wheelchair. She looked down at Grace, then back at Mrs. Adebayo. I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you correctly. Did you say her husband refused to bring her because of food? Yes. Food. Food. Nurse Blessing's voice rose. This woman is having a baby, and her husband is worried about food? She shook her head and muttered something under her breath as she continued wheeling Grace toward the maternity ward. In 15 years of nursing, I have seen many things. Absent husbands, drunk husbands, scared husbands. But this is a new level of wickedness. Inside the labor ward, they transferred Grace to a bed. The contractions were coming faster now, more intense. She cried out, her whole body tensing with each wave of pain. Mike, she whimpered between contractions. Where is Mike? Why did he leave me? Why? Nurse Blessing gently wiped the sweat from Grace's forehead. Listen to me, sister. I know it hurts. I know you want your husband here. But right now, you need to focus on bringing this baby safely into the world. Can you do that for me? Grace nodded weakly, but the tears wouldn't stop. Even as her body went through the most intense physical experience of her life, The emotional pain of Mike's abandonment cut deeper than any contraction. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Mike sat in the dark living room, eating leftover rice from the previous day. His two friends, Emeka and Tund, had come by after hearing what happened. "Guy, are you serious?" Emeka asked, staring at Mike in disbelief. "Your wife is at the hospital giving birth, and you're here eating rice?" Mike shrugged. "She disrespected me. I had to stand my ground." Tund leaned forward. "Stand your ground? Mike, your wife could die. Do you understand that? Women die in childbirth every day in this country. What if something happens to her?" "Nothing will happen," Mike said dismissively. "She's just being overdramatic. By morning she'll give birth and come back home and realize she was wrong." Emeka stood up. "I can't be part of this. This is madness." He headed for the door, then turned back. "You know what, Mike? I always thought you were my friend. But tonight, you've shown me who you really are. You're not a man. You're a coward hiding behind the title of husband." He left, and Tund followed shortly after, shaking his head. Alone in the apartment, Mike tried to convince himself he had done the right thing. "A man must be respected in his home," he muttered to himself. "If I give in now, she'll never respect me again." But as the night wore on and the apartment grew quieter, doubt began to creep in. He remembered the way Grace had looked at him, the fear in her eyes. He remembered her on her knees, begging. He remembered the disappointment on Mrs. Adebayo's face. He tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace's face. Back at the hospital, Grace had been in active labor for 6 hours. The pain was unbearable, but worse than the physical agony was the emotional devastation. With each contraction, she called out for Mike, asking why he wasn't there, wondering what she had done to deserve this. Mrs. Adebayo stayed by her side the entire time, playing the role that Mike should have been playing. She held Grace's hand, encouraged her, prayed with her. "You are stronger than you know, my daughter," Mrs. Adebayo said. "This baby will come, and you will both be fine. God has not abandoned you, even if your husband has." At 3:47 a.m., after hours of labor, Grace gave one final, exhausting push, and the sound of a newborn's cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Nurse Blessing announced, holding up the tiny, wrinkled baby. "A healthy baby boy." Grace collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure. But when they placed her son on her chest, skin to skin, something inside her broke open. She looked down at his tiny face, his little fingers curling and uncurling, and she wept. "He's here," she whispered. "My baby is here." But even in that moment of joy, there was a hollow ache. She looked at the door, half expecting Mike to walk through it. But the door remained closed. "He should be here," Grace said softly, looking at Mrs. Adebayo through tears. "Why isn't he here to meet his son?" Mrs. Adebayo kissed her forehead. "Some men don't deserve the moments they miss. But don't let his absence steal your joy. This baby came into the world strong, and so did you. Remember that." As dawn broke over Lagos, Grace lay in the recovery ward with a newborn son sleeping beside her. She was a mother now. But she had become a mother alone, without the support of the man who had promised to love and protect her. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. The pain of childbirth would fade. But the pain of Mike's betrayal, that would take much longer to heal. By morning, the story of what Mike had done had spread through their neighborhood like wildfire. In Lagos, news traveled fast, especially news this scandalous. The night security guard at the hospital had overheard Nurse Blessing telling her colleagues about the heartless husband who abandoned his wife over food, and he had shared the story with the early morning food vendors. From there, it jumped from person to person, shop to shop, street to street. At the market, women selling vegetables and fish whispered to their customers, "Have you heard about that man Mike? The one who works for the telecom company? He left his wife in labor because she didn't cook his dinner. Can you imagine such wickedness?" At the mechanic workshop, men shook their heads in disgust, This is why marriage is becoming a joke. How can a man value food over his wife's life? What kind of husband does that? Even at the local church, where Grace and Mike occasionally attended Sunday services, the congregation buzzed with the scandal. Pastor Emmanuel had heard about it from one of his deacons and was deeply troubled. Back at the hospital, Grace woke to find her room filled with visitors. Women from her neighborhood, some she barely knew, had come bearing gifts, baby clothes, diapers, food for her recovery. They sat around her bed, alternating between congratulating her on her beautiful baby boy and cursing Mike's name. "That man is not fit to be called a husband," one woman said, kissing the baby's forehead. "What you went through last night, my sister, only God knows how you survived it." Another added, "If I were you, I would pack my things and never go back to that house. A man who can abandon you at your most vulnerable moment will do worse things in the future." Grace listened quietly, holding her son close. Part of her appreciated their support, but another part felt embarrassed that her private pain had become public entertainment. Mrs. Adebayo, who had spent the night on an uncomfortable chair beside Grace's bed, finally spoke up. "Enough talk. Let the girl rest. She's been through enough without all of you reminding her of her husband's foolishness." The women reluctantly quieted down, but the damage was done. The shame that Mike should have felt was now somehow also Grace's burden to carry. Around noon, Nurse Blessing came to check on Grace and the baby. She took the infant's temperature, examined Grace's recovery, and nodded with satisfaction. "You're both doing well. The baby is healthy and feeding properly. You should be able to go home in 2 days." Grace's face fell at the word home. Nurse Blessing noticed. "What's wrong?" "I don't want to go back there," Grace admitted quietly. "I don't want to see him." "Then don't," Nurse Blessing said firmly. "You have options. You can go to your mother's house. You can stay with friends. You don't have to return to a man who showed you where you stand in his priorities." Grace nodded, but she looked confused and lost. "But he's my husband. We took vows. And this is his son." "A title doesn't make a man," Nurse Blessing said gently. "Actions do. And his actions showed you that he values his comfort over your life. Remember that." That afternoon, Mike finally decided to show his face at the hospital. He had spent the morning trying to go about his day normally, but everywhere he went, people stared. At the small shop where he usually bought cigarettes, the owner had served him silently, her face tight with disapproval. At the barber shop, conversations stopped when he walked in. He finally understood that the story had gotten out, and he needed to do damage control. When he arrived at the hospital, he carried a small plastic bag with bread and soft drinks, a half-hearted peace offering. He walked through the maternity ward trying to look confident, but his eyes darted nervously at every nurse and patient who glanced his way. He found Grace's room and knocked lightly before entering. Grace was sitting up in bed, the baby sleeping in a bassinet beside her. Mrs. Adebayo sat in the corner, her arms crossed, her face hard as stone. "Grace," Mike said, forcing a smile. "I heard you delivered safely. Thank God. Where is my son?" Grace turned her face away from him. "Don't call him your son. You left us to die last night." Mike laughed awkwardly. "Come on now, don't exaggerate. You didn't die. You're fine, and the baby is fine. See? Everything worked out." Mrs. Adebayo shot to her feet. "Worked out? Are you mad? Your wife nearly died. She begged you for help, and you refused because of rice and shirts. What kind of man are you?" "Mama, please," Mike started, but Mrs. Adebayo cut him off. "Don't mama me. You are a disgrace. I have 6 children, and not one of them would ever treat their wife the way you treated my daughter last night." Mike's face hardened. "This is between me and my wife. You have no right to interfere in my marriage." "Oh, I have no right." Mrs. Adebayo stepped closer to him. "I had the right when I had to carry your wife down those stairs while you sat eating groundnuts. I had the right when I held her hand all through the night while she cried for you. I earned that right. At that moment, Nurse Blessing appeared in the doorway. She had heard Mike's voice and came to see for herself if the infamous husband had actually shown up. "So you're the husband," she said coldly. "The one who values food over his wife's life." Mike tried to defend himself. "You don't understand. She disrespected me. A man has to. A man has to protect his family," Nurse Blessing interrupted. "That's what a real man does. What you did was abandon a woman in her most vulnerable moment. Do you know how many women we lose in this hospital because their husbands delayed them? Do you know how close your wife came to complications because of your selfishness?" "She looks fine to me," Mike said stubbornly. "She looks fine because God was merciful and because strangers showed her the kindness you couldn't," Nurse Blessing shot back. "Let me tell you something. Your name is now famous in this hospital. Every nurse, every doctor, every cleaner knows the story of the man who abandoned his wife for food. That's your legacy." An elderly patient in the next bed, who had been listening to the whole exchange, spoke up. "Young man, you should be ashamed of yourself. In my 70 years, I have never heard of such wickedness. You are a husband in name only." Mike's face burned with embarrassment and anger. He slammed the plastic bag on the table beside Grace's bed. "I brought you food. I came to see my son. But if this is how you all want to treat me, I'm leaving." He stormed out of the room, his pride wounded but not yet broken enough to see his own fault. After he left, Grace finally allowed herself to cry. Not just tears, but deep, sobbing cries that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Mrs. Adebayo moved to the bed and held her while she wept. "Let it out, my daughter. Cry now so you can be strong later." That evening, as the sun set over Lagos, the story of Mike's shame had reached every corner of their community. At the local beer parlor where he and his friends usually gathered, the men were discussing it openly. "I heard he refused to take her because she didn't cook his food," one man said, sipping his beer. Another laughed bitterly. "Food. Can you imagine? My wife gave birth to twins last year, and I didn't even remember to eat for 2 days. I was so worried about her." But this Mike, he was thinking about his stomach while his wife was dying. When Mike tried to show up at the beer parlor that night, hoping to escape the judgment at the hospital, he was met with cold stares. Nobody greeted him. Nobody called him over to their table. He sat alone in a corner, nursing a warm beer, and for the first time, the weight of what he had done began to truly sink in. The days following Grace's delivery were perhaps the darkest of Mike's life, though he was too proud to admit it at first. He walked through the streets of their Lagos neighborhood with his head up, pretending the stares and whispers didn't bother him. But they did. Oh, they did. Children playing football in the street would stop and point at him. "That's the man who left his wife," they would shout, laughing. Women at the market would fall silent when he passed, only to resume their harsh gossip the moment he was out of earshot, or sometimes before. The breaking point came on the 3rd evening after the birth. Mike had been summoned to appear before the community elders, a group of respected men who met under the large mango tree near the neighborhood mosque to settle disputes and address serious matters affecting their community. He had tried to ignore the summons at first, but Mr. Okafor, one of the elders, had come to his door personally. "Mike, this is not optional. When the elders call, you come. Or do you want to add disrespect to your already long list of offenses?" So Mike went, dragging his feet, his heart heavy with dread. When he arrived at the mango tree, he found about 15 men seated in a semicircle. Among them were traders, teachers, the imam from the local mosque, mechanics, and businessmen, the pillars of their community. Their faces were stern. Boba Ogunlade, the oldest man in the neighborhood at 78 years old, sat in the center. His walking stick rested against his chair, and his weathered face was set in deep lines of disappointment. "Mike, sit down," Boba Ogunlade commanded. Mike sat on a low wooden stool that had been placed in front of the elders, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Mr. Okafor, a teacher at the local secondary school, spoke first. "Mike, we have called you here because the whole community is talking about what you did to your wife. Before we pass judgment, we want to hear your side of the story. Why did you refuse to take Grace to the hospital when she was in labor? Mike cleared his throat, trying to muster his usual bravado. She had disrespected me. The whole day, she didn't cook for me. My shirts were dirty. A wife has responsibilities, and she was neglecting them. I was trying to teach her. Teach her. The imam's voice cut through Mike's explanation like a knife. You were trying to teach a woman in labor a lesson about cooking? Do you know that labor is a matter of life and death? But she survived, didn't she? Mike said defensively. She's fine. The baby is fine. The men erupted in anger. One of them, a mechanic named Usman, stood up and pointed his finger at Mike's face. That is your answer? That she survived? Let me tell you something. My wife gave birth last year, and I carried her on my back to the main road when our car broke down because I knew every second mattered. And you sat in your house counting dirty shirts while your wife begged you for help. Baba Ogunlade raised his hand for silence. When the men quieted down, he spoke, his voice heavy with authority. Mike, do you know why we are different from animals? It is not because we are smarter. Many animals are clever. It is because we have conscience. We have the ability to put others before ourselves, especially those who depend on us. A woman in labor is completely vulnerable. She is at the mercy of her husband to protect her. And you failed that test. But I'm the man of the house, Mike protested weakly. I have to maintain respect. Respect. Another elder, a retired soldier named Mr. Adelik, laughed bitterly. You think what you did earned you respect? Look around this community. Do you see respect in people's eyes when they look at you? No. You see disgust. You see pity. You see shame. Baba Ogunlade struck his walking stick against the ground. Mike, stand up. Mike stood, his legs shaking slightly. Now kneel. What? Baba, I. Kneel. The old man's voice thundered with an authority that made Mike's knees buckle. He sank to the ground, kneeling in the dirt in front of 15 men who had lost all respect for him. Baba Ogunlade continued. You will go to your wife and beg for her forgiveness. Not with words alone, but with actions. You will serve her the way she served you. You will show her the kindness she showed you even when you didn't deserve it. And until you prove to this community that you have truly changed, you are not welcome at our gatherings. We do not sit with men who have no conscience. The other elders nodded in agreement. The Imam added, in Islam, we say that paradise lies at the feet of mothers. Your wife nearly died bringing your child into this world, and you were worried about food. May Allah forgive you, because I don't know if I can. Mike remained on his knees, tears beginning to stream down his face. For the first time since that terrible night, the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. He had been so focused on his pride, his need to be respected, his anger at Grace for not fulfilling what he saw as her duties, that he had completely lost sight of what marriage actually meant. I didn't think, he stammered. No, you didn't think, Mr. Okafor said coldly. That's the problem. You didn't think about your wife's pain. You didn't think about your unborn child's safety. You only thought about yourself. That night, Mike walked home alone through dark streets, his heart heavier than it had ever been. The shame that he had been trying to suppress with pride and excuses finally consumed him completely. He thought about Grace on her knees begging him, thought about how scared she must have been, thought about her crying for him in the hospital while strangers held her hand. He thought about his son, born without his father present, and felt a shame so deep it made him physically sick. When he reached his apartment, he sat alone in the darkness and wept. Not the angry tears of a man whose pride has been wounded, but the broken tears of someone who finally sees the monster they've become. The next morning, Mike woke up with a new resolve. He needed to make things right, but he had no idea how. How do you apologize for something so unforgivable? How do you rebuild trust you've shattered so completely? He started small. He cleaned the entire apartment, something he had never done before. He washed the dishes, swept the floors, even scrubbed the bathroom. As he worked, he thought about all the times he had watched Grace do these tasks while he sat idly by, never offering to help, never appreciating the work she did. Then he went to the market and bought supplies to cook a meal. He had never cooked before, it was woman's work in his mind, but now he struggled with the kerosene stove, trying to prepare a simple jollof rice. It burned. He tried again. It was too watery. On his third attempt, he finally managed something edible. As he worked, neighbors passing by his window stopped to stare in disbelief. "Is that Mike cooking?" they whispered. Maybe the elder's words got through to him. That afternoon, Mike packed the food carefully and headed to Mrs. Adebayo's house, where Grace had gone to stay after being discharged from the hospital. His hands trembled as he knocked on the door. Mrs. Adebayo answered, her face hardening when she saw him. "What do you want?" "Mama, please. I need to see Grace. I need to talk to her." "Talk? You want to talk now?" Where was this desire to talk when she was begging you to take her to the hospital? "I know, Mama. I know I failed. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Mrs. Adebayo stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. "Wait here." She went inside, and Mike could hear hushed voices. After what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Adebayo returned. "She says you can come in. But if you upset her or the baby, I will chase you out myself." Mike entered the small compound to find Grace sitting under a tree, the baby sleeping in her arms. She looked tired, older somehow than she had just days ago. The sparkle that used to be in her eyes when she looked at him was completely gone. He approached slowly, setting down the pot of food he had prepared. "Grace, I cooked for you. I know it's not as good as yours, but I tried." She looked at the pot, then at him, her expression unreadable. Mike fell to his knees in front of her, his pride completely gone. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was a fool. I was wicked. I let my pride and anger control me, and I almost lost everything that matters." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Mike continued, his own tears falling freely now. "I don't know if I even deserve the chance to try to make this right. But please, Grace, let me try. Let me be the husband I should have been. Let me be the father our son deserves." The baby stirred in Grace's arms, and she looked down at him, then back at Mike. "Do you know what you did to me? Do you understand the pain you caused?" "I'm beginning to," Mike whispered. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." Grace was silent for a long moment. Mrs. Adebayo watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, ready to intervene if needed. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Actions, Mike. Not words. If you want to prove you've changed, show me with actions. Because right now, I don't trust a single word that comes out of your mouth." Mike nodded, understanding that this was not forgiveness, but perhaps the smallest opening of a door. And that would have to be enough for now. The days that followed Mike's apology were not easy. Forgiveness, Grace was learning, was not a single moment but a long, painful journey with many setbacks and struggles. Mike's tears and promises meant little to her now. She had heard him make promises before, promises to help around the house, promises to be more considerate, promises to change. But he never had. Not until his reputation was destroyed and the entire community turned against him. Still, something in his eyes that day under the tree had been different. Maybe it was genuine remorse. Maybe it was just fear of losing everything. Grace didn't know which, but she decided to watch and wait. Mike threw himself into proving his change was real. Every morning, he would come to Mrs. Adebayo's house before going to work. He would help with whatever needed to be done, fetching water from the borehole, sweeping the compound, even changing the baby's diapers, though his first attempts were comically bad. "No, not like that," Mrs. Adebayo would scold, watching him fumble with the cloth diaper. "You fold this part first, then wrap it around. Are you trying to suffocate the child? Mike would apologize and try again, his face flushed with embarrassment but determined to learn. The neighbors watched this transformation with mixed reactions. Some were skeptical. He's only doing this because he was shamed, one woman said at the market. Wait and see. Once people forget, he'll go back to his old ways. Others were more hopeful. Maybe this will be a lesson for other men, Mr. Okafor commented to his wife. Sometimes a man needs to hit rock bottom before he can build himself back up. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the birth, Mike came to Mrs. Adebayo's house to find Grace crying softly while the baby slept. She was sitting on the veranda, her shoulders shaking. Mike's heart clenched. He approached carefully. Grace. What's wrong? Is the baby okay? She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. The baby is fine. I'm not. What do you mean? Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand. I keep having nightmares. I keep reliving that night. I'm back on our floor, begging you to help me, and you're just standing there, cold and angry. And in the dream, the neighbors don't come. Nobody comes. And I die there alone, while you watch. Mike felt like he'd been punched in the chest. He had been so focused on proving himself through actions that he hadn't considered the deep psychological wound he had inflicted. Grace sighed. Do you know what it feels like? She continued, her voice breaking. To beg the person who promised to love and protect you, and have them turn their back? To know that your life meant less to your husband than a plate of food? I don't know if I can ever forget that feeling, Mike. I don't know if I can ever feel safe with you again. Mike sat down on the ground beside her chair, not daring to touch her. I can't take back what I did. I can't erase that night. All I can do is show you, every single day for the rest of my life, that I'm not that man anymore. That I'm ashamed of who I was. That I'm trying to become someone worthy of you and our son. But how do I know? Grace whispered. How do I know you won't do something like that again? Maybe not the same thing, but something equally cruel when you're angry. Mike was quiet for a long moment. You don't know. I can't give you certainty. All I can give you is consistency. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Until maybe one day, you can trust me again. Mrs. Adebayo, who had been listening from inside the house, came out with 2 cups of water. Grace, my daughter, let me tell you something. When your father and I first got married, he was terrible. Lazy, selfish, always complaining. I almost left him 3 times in the first 2 years. Grace looked up in surprise. Really? But you and Papa were so happy. We were happy because he changed. Really changed, not just pretended for a few weeks. It took time. It took him hitting his own rock bottom. But he did it. Not all men can, but some can. Only time will tell if Mike is one of them. She handed them the water and went back inside, leaving them alone with the weight of her words. Over the following weeks, Mike continued his efforts. He enrolled in a parenting class at the local clinic, something that made his friends laugh. Mike, attending class to learn how to be a father. We just learn as we go. But Mike didn't care about their mockery anymore. He sat in those classes with new mothers and a few other fathers, learning about infant care, postpartum recovery, and how to support a partner through the challenges of new parenthood. He learned that Grace's exhaustion that day, her inability to cook, was likely due to early labor pains, something he would have known if he had paid any attention to her needs instead of his own comfort. The instructor, a middle-aged nurse named Sister Funmi, was impressed by his dedication. After one class, she pulled him aside. Mike, I've heard your story. The whole hospital knows it. But I want you to know something. It's rare that I see a man truly trying to change. Most just wait for the talk to die down and go back to their old ways. Keep doing what you're doing. Mike also started attending counseling sessions at the community health center. The counselor, Mr. Adeyemi, helped him understand the deep-seated beliefs about masculinity and power that had driven his behavior. You were taught that being a man means being obeyed, Mr. Adeyemi explained during one session. That respect means having control over your wife. But real respect, real manhood, is about being trustworthy, being kind, being someone your family can depend on in their darkest moments. I failed that test completely, Mike admitted. Yes, you did. But failure doesn't have to be final. The question is, what will you do with this failure? Let it define you, or let it transform you? Mike chose transformation, though it was harder than he ever imagined. There were moments when his old pride would surge up. When Grace would speak sharply to him or reject his help, his instinct was to get angry, to demand respect. But he would remember that night, remember her on her knees begging him, and the shame would flood back, washing away the anger. 1 month after the birth, the elders called Mike back to the mango tree. He went with his heart pounding, unsure what to expect. Baba Ogunlade studied him carefully. Mike, we have been watching you. We've heard from people that you are trying to change. But we want to hear from you. Have you changed? Mike thought carefully before answering. Baba, I can't say I've fully changed. I still have moments when the old me tries to come back. But I'm fighting him every day. I'm learning to be a better man, a better husband, a better father. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but I'm committed to it. The Imam nodded approvingly. That is an honest answer. Change is not an event, it is a process. Keep walking that path. Mr. Okafor added, we are lifting the social ban on you. You may join community gatherings again. But know this, we will still be watching. One mistake, one hint that you're returning to your old ways, and you will answer to us again. Mike bowed his head in gratitude. Thank you, Baba. I won't disappoint you. But the real test came 2 months later when Mike asked Grace to move back home with him. She had been staying at her mother's house, and while Mike visited daily, they hadn't lived together since that terrible night. I'm not ready, Grace told him honestly. I'm still afraid. What can I do to help you feel safe? Mike asked, and the fact that he asked rather than demanded was itself a sign of change. Grace thought about it. I want us to go to counseling together. I want a third party to help us rebuild. And I want you to understand that if you ever show me that kind of cruelty again, I will leave and I will not come back. I understand, Mike said. And I agree to everything. They began couples counseling with Mr. Adeyemi. The sessions were difficult. Grace had to express the depth of her pain and trauma, which often left her crying. Mike had to sit with the discomfort of hearing exactly how much he had hurt her, without defending himself or making excuses. Grace, when you heard Mike refuse to help you that night, what went through your mind? Mr. Adeyemi asked during one session. I thought, I'm going to die. And the father of my child doesn't care enough to save me, Grace answered, her voice barely audible. I felt so worthless. Like 9 months of carrying his child, years of taking care of him. All of it meant nothing. Mike's hands trembled as he listened. Grace, you were never worthless. I was the worthless one. I was the one who failed to see your value. Then why did you treat me that way? Grace's voice rose, months of suppressed anger finally emerging. Why was your pride more important than my life? Why? Mike had no good answer because there was no good answer. Because I was broken inside. Because I was taught wrong things about what it means to be a man. Because I was selfish and cruel. None of that is an excuse. It's just the truth. Mr. Adeyemi guided them through the difficult work of rebuilding trust. It wasn't quick or easy. There were setbacks. There were nights when Grace would wake up from nightmares and push Mike away when he tried to comfort her. There were days when Mike's patience would wear thin and he'd have to remove himself from the situation before saying something he'd regret. But slowly, painfully, they made progress. 3 months after that terrible night, Grace finally agreed to move back home. But she set boundaries. If you raise your voice at me in anger, I'm leaving. If you ever again prioritize your comfort over my well-being, I'm leaving. If you break my trust in any major way, I'm leaving. Do you understand? I understand, Mike said. And I accept those terms completely. Life together was different now. Mike did half the housework without being asked. He woke up for the baby's night feedings. When Grace was tired, he cooked. When she was overwhelmed, he took over. He was no longer a man who needed to be served. He was a partner sharing the load. The neighbors noticed the change. Women who had cursed Mike's name began to comment. You know, maybe he really has changed. I saw him at the market yesterday buying vegetables and carrying the baby on his back. That's not the same man who abandoned his wife. But there were still skeptics. Let's see how long it lasts, some said. Give it 6 months. He'll be back to his old self. 6 months passed. Then a year. Mike continued to be the man he had promised to become. He never missed a pediatric appointment for their son, now a chubby, laughing baby named Daniel. He celebrated Grace's achievements. When she started a small sewing business from home, he was her first customer and her biggest promoter. On Daniel's first birthday, they held a small party in their compound. Neighbors came, bringing gifts and good wishes. Baba Ogunlade attended, as did the Imam, Mr. Okafor, and many of the elders who had condemned Mike a year earlier. During the celebration, Baba Ogunlade asked to speak. The crowd quieted. 1 year ago, we witnessed a great wrong in this community. A man failed his wife in her most desperate hour. We shamed him. We banned him. We told him he was not worthy to be called a man. Mike felt his face grow hot, but he stood still, holding Daniel in his arms. But today, Baba Ogunlade continued, we celebrate not just this beautiful child's first birthday, but also a man's rebirth. Mike, you fell. You fell hard. But you got back up, and you did the difficult work of becoming better. That is worth celebrating too. The crowd clapped, though some applause was more enthusiastic than others. Grace stood beside Mike, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She still had moments of fear and doubt, but they were becoming less frequent. The nightmares had stopped. She could see that Mike's change was real and lasting. That night, after the guests had left and Daniel was asleep, Grace and Mike sat together on their small balcony, looking out at the Lagos night. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive me? Mike asked quietly. Grace was silent for a long moment. I don't know. Some wounds heal completely. Others leave scars. But I can say this, I'm no longer afraid of you. I'm no longer waiting for you to become that cruel man again. That's something. It's everything, Mike said. Thank you for giving me a chance I didn't deserve. You're giving me a husband I do deserve, Grace replied. Every day, you're earning that chance. Don't stop. I won't, Mike promised. And this time, Grace believed him. The story of Mike and Grace became a cautionary tale in their community, told to young men about to get married. Remember Mike, who nearly lost everything because of pride and cruelty. Don't be like the man he was. Be like the man he became. And for Grace, the story became one of survival and strength. Women in the neighborhood would come to her when they faced difficulties in their marriages, seeking her advice and support. She became known as someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. What's your secret? A young bride asked her one day. How did you find the courage to set boundaries with your husband? Grace smiled, bouncing Daniel on her knee. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their worst behavior. Sometimes love means saying, you must do better, or I will walk away. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. And surprisingly, it can save a marriage instead of ending one. Years later, Mike would volunteer as a mentor for new fathers at the community health center. He would share his story, not with pride, but with humility, as a warning and a testament to the possibility of change. I was the worst kind of husband, he would tell groups of young men. I valued my ego over my wife's life. But my wife's strength, the community's intervention, and my own willingness to face my failures saved me from becoming that man forever. Don't wait for a crisis to become the husband your wife deserves. Start today. And in their small Lagos apartment, Grace and Mike built a new marriage on the ruins of the old one. It wasn't perfect. No marriage is. But it was built on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the hard-earned understanding that true strength lies not in domination but in partnership. The night that almost destroyed them became, paradoxically, the night that saved them. Because sometimes, Grace thought as she watched Mike gently rock Daniel to sleep years later, we have to break completely before we can rebuild into something stronger. Her mother had been right about one thing. Patience was important in marriage. But Grace had learned that patience without boundaries was just endurance of abuse. Real love required both patience and standards, both forgiveness and accountability. And as she watched her husband, truly her partner now, sing softly to their son, Grace felt something she hadn't felt that terrible night in the hospital. Hope. Not just for her own future, but hope that maybe, just maybe, other women would hear her story and know they didn't have to accept cruelty in silence. That they could demand better. That they deserved better. And sometimes, if they were very lucky and very firm, they might even get it. The end. Thank you for watching Grace and Mike's complete story. This journey showed us that while change is possible, it requires genuine remorse, consistent effort, and time. What did you think of this story? Should Grace have forgiven Mike? What would you have done in her situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart or taught you something valuable, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our powerful stories about love, redemption, family, and the strength of the human spirit. Remember, you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. Never settle for less. Until next time, stay blessed and stay strong. Flexed biceps, red heart.